I moved to Thailand in January 2009, and I did so with enough money to live for the rest of my life. I started out living in Bangkok, a city where I had actually lived 10 years prior to 2009 for a year when I was posted there for a company I was working for, and I loved the city ever since. I'd been living in Bangkok for approximately 6 months on a retirement visa. I was 52 years old, happy, and looking forward to what the rest of my retirement would bring. I was living on Sukhumvit Soy 11, and every day was just like I was on holiday, but that's how it was meant to be. I'd worked hard, and now it was my time to play hard. So when I met a girl in a bar on Soy Cowboy, and things started getting serious, I didn't think too much about it because I had the money to spare, and I will admit I had an addiction to the bars. I just wanted to move ahead with how things were going, because we seemed to be perfect together. She was 23 years old from a little village in Isan, and it felt so great to get into a relationship with her because she was the first girl that I met that I actually felt a really deep connection to. I didn't start out by wanting to have a wife, but that is how things turned out. And to anyone who says I shouldn't have got into a relationship with a bar girl, I get what you're saying, but for me, she fit into my lifestyle so well. Drinking, partying, and generally having a good time all the time. Life was good. She was amazing at having a great time, and she reminded me of myself when I was her age, and before long, we were indeed married, living together in a great apartment in central Bangkok. We spent most of our time just living life to the fullest every single day. We would go to the beach regularly, switching it up between Phuket, Samui, and a few of the other islands. We would also leave Thailand occasionally, going to neighbouring countries, and for the first year of us living together and being married, I was incredibly happy with the decision I made to both retire to Thailand and get married to her. My retirement had gotten off to a fabulous start. I wasn't one of those guys who moved to Thailand with a pittance. I had more than enough money invested, both in a few properties in my own country, other dividend-paying stocks, a few index funds, and I guess I was probably bringing in an income of around $6,000 a month. In 2009, 2010, after we'd been together for a year, this was a fantastic amount of money to be able to live on in Thailand, and I also had liquid cash available, probably to the tune of around $600,000. I didn't have any plans for that. I was open to anything that came my way. But after 30 years of incredibly hard work, very late nights, and sometimes working 7 days straight for months on end, I felt like I deserved to enjoy myself. While I had a few friends at this time who lived on a lot less money than I did and had a great time, it was my intention to spend all of my monthly income to make sure that I was enjoying myself. I had it coming in, it had to go out one way or the other. That was just my mentality. And we were coming up to the end of 2010, and I decided to take my wife away on a year-end break, a few weeks before the end of the year, just to try to avoid the main crowds. We decided that we would go to Krabi. It was part of the country I'd never been to before, and it was then our intention to drive down from Bangkok. At this point, I bought a car. I bought a Mercedes C-Class, only the 2-litre because although I could have afforded to buy one with a bigger engine, it would have been a lot more expensive because the import taxes on cars in Thailand were so insane. I just didn't think it was worth spending 3 times what the car was worth just to have it. But I liked nice things, and that was the car we were going to drive down to Krabi in. My wife was still friendly with some of the girls that worked in the bar where she used to work, and I didn't have any problem with that. I think when you have enough money to not care about anything, it really does make a difference. So, she asked me if one of her friends could go with us. I would have to pay for everything, and if that was acceptable, she would be eternally grateful. And I think I should point out that my wife knows I had a good income, but she didn't know I had liquid cash or what my investments were or anything like that. As far as she was concerned, I had 100,000 baht a month to live on, and for her that was a lot of money. The fact that I was on probably double that, I didn't really feel like I needed to tell her. The reason that this girl was going to be going with us was because she had recently broken up with her boyfriend. She was feeling a bit upset, and my wife wanted to make sure that she was okay, and she said that we could all have a good time together. I wasn't about to say no to something like that, so we set off to Krabi. We actually spent a night in Hua Hin, which was fun, and another night in Surat Thani. Both of those places I'd been to before, and that was one of the things I loved most about Thailand. Being able to go to all these amazing places everywhere, especially when you have your own transport, and see the different side of the country and what it has to offer. But anyway, we made it down to Krabi, and it was initially my plan to stay for a week. We checked into this incredible resort just outside Ao Nang, probably 5,000 baht a night, and back then that was a lot. I'd guessed today something similar would be closer to 10,000, but it was so incredible, and I was just feeling it so much that I asked how would my wife feel if we could extend our stay there to a month, maybe 6 weeks. She was more than happy, and her friend was as well. I want you to picture my wife. Picture a girl who was incredibly stunning. 24 years old at the time, really long hair that she had bleached, and there was about 4 inches of her natural hair colour coming through, exactly how I liked it. Some people might disagree with me, but she was covered in tattoos, and I love that sort of thing. If you don't, that's your taste, but I do. And she had a lip ring. She was also a little bit more sophisticated than some of the other girls that I'd met. Her English was of a higher level than many girls I met, and she had a side to her that I could tell was coming out. As she was getting a bit older, eventually it seemed that she would have wanted to settle down and not continue partying all the time, but we were both very happy to be doing this in the time. I wasn't ready to settle down, and because of that, I was just so happy to have my ideal wife and life. Her friend was a bit more reserved, 22, and not one tattoo or piercing, but she was still beautiful. What I'm trying to say is that I felt very fortunate that my wife was open to all kinds of things, and the first few weeks we spent at that resort were so good, at least for me, that I wouldn't even want to describe everything that went on because I don't think anybody would believe me. While we wanted to avoid the New Year crowds, because we extended our stay there, we would be there for New Year, and that was good for me, because the place was just so epic. Our days at the resort would involve waking late, having an amazing breakfast, partying from 1 p.m. and keeping it going all the way until the end of the day, both drinking in our room, which had its own private pool attached, and also going out to the bars and restaurants around Ao Nang. I guess we'd been there for a month, and I didn't want to return to Bangkok. As I said, we kept extending. But one thing that was constant was my wife's friend was continuously being called by her old boyfriend, a younger guy from Germany. He was calling her all the time. He missed her, he wanted to see her, and eventually she caved in and told him to come down to Krabi to see if they could sort things out together. He was 29, and he did remind me of myself when I was that age, apart from I was hard-working, making a lot of money and partying when I could. He was just partying when he could, worry about the money later kind of thing. But because he was in Thailand, he was still in a lot better financial position than my wife's friend was. So I suppose that's why she caved in and told him to come down and see us. When he arrived, he took a small room in a hotel not too far away from the resort, and I think he probably understood what was going on between me and my wife and his girlfriend at the time when he wasn't with her. But I wasn't one of those guys to try and rub salt in the wound or anything. I was just actually ready for a break because it had been a crazy time. We went on to spend another month there. He was back together with his girlfriend now, and we had quite a number of really drunken nights, and before long it was time to return to Bangkok. I drove us all back there, and it was great. We had a good time. At this point, I was spending about 40,000 baht a month for our condo in Bangkok, which again at the time was quite a lot for rent, but I could more than afford it. But I was thinking about actually buying my own place because I had the available cash. I started looking around at options, and I did buy a condo a few hundred meters from the Asok BTS station. It was a large one-bedroom unit, Plus there was a tiny room that I could use for an office-type space, but it wasn't really big enough to be a bedroom. That cost me the equivalent of $130,000, and I spent about $10,000 getting it to my liking. Life was going better than I thought life could go. I guess we'd been back from Krabi for 4 months at this point because, it was May, and I was wanting to go away somewhere else. My wife invited her friend and her boyfriend, who were still together, and this time we went to Phuket. We spent a month there. We shared a really nice resort, a 2-bedroom villa-style place, private pool, the works. And again, we had another incredible time and returned to Bangkok. And I was thinking that I was the luckiest man in the world for being able to live such an incredible life in retirement. Back in Bangkok, in my own condo, we were going to Soy Cowboy quite often, as well as the other places that were within walking distance. But that was always my favourite place to go. But about 6 weeks later, my wife started throwing up in the morning. She started feeling really not well and didn't really tell me much more, so we went to the hospital. She was pregnant. That wasn't exactly what I had been planning. I'd never had kids and I didn't want kids because, I think it's quite obvious I wanted to enjoy myself. And if I had kids, I would want them to enjoy themselves a lot more than I would want to enjoy myself. So basically, I felt like my whole life was over. But I was happy at the same time because there was no use being unhappy about it because it couldn't be changed. The birth control pills she was taking obviously didn't do their job. The first thing I'm thinking, though, is I've just bought this condo and it's only 1 bedroom. Where is our child going to sleep? While I felt like I knew Thailand very well at this point, I was not aware of how common it was for people's kids to stay in their parents' room, and even in the parents' bed until they're up to 5, 6, or even 7 years old. I've heard of even longer than that. And where I was from, this was completely opposite. I was in my own crib from the day I was born, and probably 3 months after that, I was in my own room. That was just how it was done in my family, and I assumed it would be something similar to that in Thailand. But I was wrong. It was nothing like. But anyway, now my wife is pregnant. She couldn't go out partying and drinking anymore, and while I still went out occasionally, it just wasn't the same without her. I wasn't somebody who would ever cheat on his spouse, unless she was the one who came up with the idea and that was all well and good, but I would never do something like that because I thought that was the lowest of the low. So going out, it just wasn't the same anymore without her. We went away for a month when she was about 4 months pregnant, but again, it just wasn't the same, because everything that we did before we couldn't do anymore. And in a way, it might have been better to slow down because I was drinking and smoking heavily every single day up until then, and I probably would have gone to an early grave. At the time, though, even though I knew that, I didn't care. I thought I would rather enjoy myself now for another 10 years, rather than not enjoy myself for another 10 years and more on top. So that month away was nothing like the times we had before, and we returned to Bangkok with no plans to go anywhere else again until my wife gave birth to our son. We'd already found out we were going to have a son. When I got married, I did everything that most foreign guys do when they need to go to Isan. I went up and did everything that was expected of me. I quite liked the place in terms of serenity, but I never had any idea to ever live there. But after my wife became pregnant, the later stages of pregnancy, I would say after 5 months, she was starting to struggle in terms of always feeling sick. She wasn't able to do much anymore, and she kept saying how much she wanted to go back to where she was from so that her family could help her. I noticed a considerable change in my wife, but you would expect that. I didn't hold anything against her, it was just what it was. And after she kept going on about it for month after month, I thought it only made sense that I take her up to her family so that she could be taken care of and make sure everything goes well with the pregnancy. We decided to go and do some shopping for all the things we would need for the baby because her village was in a small town which probably didn't have the same kind of things. So we spent the day going around and bought a car seat, absolutely everything that we could probably think of that we would need. And about $10,000 later, the car was full, and the following morning we set off to the village. It was the plan that I would spend a few days there and return to Bangkok, and she would stay there until after giving birth, maybe a few months, and then return to Bangkok and we would look for a bigger place. We arrived and I'd never actually stayed there before. When we got married, we stayed in a hotel close by, but because she wanted to be with her family, we had to stay there. And she had her old room that she had when she was growing up, but it wasn't much of anything good. This was a 100% wood house, and there were holes in the walls and you would need mosquito nets to sleep. There was no air conditioning or anything really, and after one night I'd had more than enough. I wasn't able to take it, so I went to stay in the hotel that we stayed at when we got married, and she stayed with her family. The next day I took her to order an air conditioning unit for her room, and also we got someone to put in a bit of insulation so that it would work effectively. It didn't cost a lot, maybe a couple of $1,000s for everything, so that she was going to be comfortable. I don't know how much more comfortable there she was than in our nice condo in Bangkok, but she seemed to be. But I suppose that's how she grew up. That was what she was used to, and I saw a different side to my wife than I'd ever seen before. I was used to seeing her as she was. She liked to wear makeup, she liked to wear earrings and her piercings, but now she removed all the piercings, she wasn't wearing makeup, and she doesn't do her hair anymore. I didn't have any problems with that, but it was clear that this pregnancy was changing her, and it was likely going to change her even more. One thing I loved about Thailand was how quickly they managed to do things. 3 days later, someone had already been and basically added lots of insulation to the room, the air conditioning was installed, and it was a lot more comfortable for her. The bathroom situation at places like that, if you're not aware, was something that I couldn't handle, and I'm not sure why she wanted to be there, because at our condo in Bangkok, we had a proper bathroom. But here she had to walk about 30 meters away from the house to this little hut. There was a squat toilet and a bucket of water, and that was the bathroom. It was clear that she needed what she was used to, and having her family around was good for her. I left after about a week to Bangkok, but it just wasn't the same without her. I was going out with friends occasionally, but I wasn't having as much fun because she wasn't there. And as I said, I'm definitely not the sort of person who would ever cheat on his wife. We had plans to go away again, but this was off the cards because of the pregnancy. And after about 2 weeks of me being in Bangkok, I thought I would just go up and stay in that hotel close to the village until she gave birth. The next few months passed, we were paying for the best private hospital in her hometown, and before long she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. And while the pregnancy changed her, actually having our son changed her even more, as you'd expect, and she seemed to be very proud as a parent. It was always the intention to go back to Bangkok after 3 months, and her family were very good, helping her to look after our son in the first few months, and when it was finally time to return to Bangkok, I had been myself a few times just to get away for a bit, but I was relieved. I was relieved to be going back. In fact, I would say I was delighted that we were going to be going back to Bangkok, and I couldn't wait for us to get back to our life there. I'd already learned what the situation was in terms of sleeping, and our son would likely be in our room for a number of years, so we didn't need to worry about getting a bigger place yet. And when we got back to Bangkok, we got into a very different pattern than we had before. No partying, no drinking. I was having a few beers every day and the odd cigarette now and then, but this was either when we were out for a meal or back at the condo. My life was completely different from what I expected it to be in terms of our retirement, where I expected to continuously party until I couldn't do it anymore. But we were settling down, and I think everything was going as well as it could have been, given the fact that I was in my mid-50s and I had a newborn son. Not exactly what I had planned, but I was making the best of it. It quickly became clear to me, though, that my wife was struggling. She was struggling because it was very new to her. It was new to me. I was doing my best, but she was the one doing the motherly things because she was the mother, and she was struggling. When I looked at her and compared her to the girl that I met, the difference was immense, and I'm struggling as well. Not necessarily in the same way as her, but I'm struggling because I don't have anything to do anymore. I don't have anything to look forward to anymore. I mean, I'm having a fantastic time with my son, don't get me wrong, but when he's sleeping or when he's not really doing anything, I'm not able to do what I used to. We're not going out. We're not going out to eat as much. We're eating at home a lot more. And I'm just sat there twiddling my thumbs thinking, what am I going to do? I'd say we'd been back in Bangkok for approximately 3 months, and my wife had a bit of a breakdown. I had to take her to the hospital, and it was really clear that she was struggling too much to cope. I was doing my best to help, but she asked me how I would feel if we went to go live up in the village where she had her family around her for support. Initially, I thought she meant maybe for 6 months, but she said she wanted the support around her until our son attended school. We were probably talking 4 years. And initially I pushed back, saying, let's try to get through this, but another month later, it was just awful, really. The amount she's having difficulties, I'm taking on lots of roles that someone in his 50s shouldn't have to be doing, and she's really having a hard time with things. So I caved in and said that I would go and live up in the village with her, and we could build our own place there. When I agreed to do that, I actually felt quite excited, because it was a project, and it was something to do. I could keep track of the progress of the house, and I could do something so different. I was bored to death in Bangkok, living such a different life than the retirement I'd envisaged, and it did feel like it could be a good idea to do something like that. I had ample money, so I wouldn't miss $100,000 to buy some land and build a nice house, and when her family knew that we were going to go and live up there, they were happy as well. Family in Thailand is very important, and the fact that they were going to be able to see their grandson, they were delighted. I got on very well with her family. None of them looked anything like her in terms of tattoos and things, but I got on well with all of them. They were really nice people. We packed up the condo, the small bits that we could take with us, most of the big things we just left, and we left it empty so that we had somewhere to return to when we came back to Bangkok, which I planned to do from time to time. We arrived in the village, and we both were now staying in that hotel, and after about 2 weeks of being there, construction had already started on a 2-story, 3-bedroom house on some land that I'd actually bought to my wife for a wedding present. I think it was $5,000 or something, so it wasn't a lot. I felt a renewed sense of purpose when I was watching the house get built. I wanted to make sure everything was done properly, and while I wasn't a builder, I had supervised the renovation of 2 properties that I owned in my own country. She's feeling a lot more relieved to have help from her family, and I'm actually a lot happier than I was in Bangkok, and that might sound like it should be the wrong way around. I was bored in Bangkok because I couldn't go out and do things like I wanted to do because I felt dreadful leaving my wife by herself with our son. But in the village, I wasn't bored because I was doing different things that I never thought I would have ever be doing. And yes, when I'm going around the building site, I do have a beer in hand, but I was retired and I wanted to enjoy myself just a little. I wasn't enjoying myself, but I was starting to think that maybe now that we had our son, I should get back to work. I should start a new business, we should start doing something, even if it wasn't for making money, just something to keep me occupied, because the thought of my son turning 10 years old, for example, and I'm there, a raging alcoholic, that didn't sit right with me. Also, I had to change my plan. Whereas before I wasn't too concerned about having an amazing time now, if that meant having a less time later, now I was concerned that because I wanted to be around for as long as possible for our son. Once the house was ready, I felt like I didn't have anything to do anymore. But we went to pick out all the furniture together, made everything really nice, and I even spent about $25,000 on a swimming pool, and right next to that I made an outside bar area where we could have barbecues. But if I'm being perfectly honest, thinking about it was actually a lot more fun than actually doing it. The thought of being able to sit by my own pool with a cocktail and then going and lighting up the barbecue and cooking a steak while swimming in the pool, the thought of that was considerably better than the first time I did it, because once I'd done it once, it wasn't the same. I think everyone has the same kind of attitude when it comes to things like that. Thinking about things can often be a lot better than actually doing them, and that was most definitely the case here. I then started thinking about doing some kind of business, not necessarily to make a lot of money or anything, just to have something to do, because I needed something to do to be occupied. I thought long and hard about all the potential businesses that I could do, and one thing that I kept thinking about was having some kind of wholesale place in town. This was a small town in Isan, to the north of Buriram. That's as much information as I would like to give. But my thought was, let's buy a shop house in the centre of the town and let's do a wholesale deliveries from there. My idea was to buy things in bulk. I'm talking about non-perishable goods, and then have delivery drivers take them around to all the small shops around the area, so they didn't need to go into town to buy things themselves, and just priced them less than they could buy them for at the moment. You know, things like drinks and condiments, things that people in that part of Thailand really liked. And if I could source things directly from the factory, I should be able to get them at a good price, even if it meant having to buy in huge amounts. I had the money behind me, and this wouldn't affect my investments, and I started warming to the idea. Something to keep me occupied, something for my son to be proud of, and also something for my wife to get involved with when our son was old enough to attend school. I spent at least 3 months driving around all the villages in our town and also villages around other towns, and there were so many mom and pop shops everywhere. If I could have things delivered to them that they could sell, and I could give them really good terms so they didn't need to pay up front for things and they could stock more and make more, this could actually be quite a good idea. I was well aware that there were risks with some people not paying, but I thought that would only be a marginal problem and would be outweighed by all the benefits that would come our way. After another 3 months of looking around, I decided that I would go ahead with this. I thought it was a good idea, and even if it just broke even if I lost a tiny bit of money, I'm occupied, my mind's active, and that's what it was all about. I was spending so much less money than I was before in Bangkok. We weren't going out and partying all the time, we weren't going away to expensive resorts all the time, and I was struggling to spend my investment income even if I tried. So this sounded like a great project for me to get stuck into. It was my plan to do this through a proper Thai limited company, but at the time you needed 3 shareholders. I could be one, I could only own 49% of the business, but my wife could own basically the rest of it and a token amount could belong to one of her family members. It didn't really matter. I could also set it up that I would have preference shares, which meant that I would have more votes for each of my shares than anybody else would, but that wasn't really necessary because I wasn't risking a lot of money. I did spend 3 million baht, around $100,000 give or take at the time, on a shop house in town that we could do it from, and that went into my wife's name because it was just the easiest thing to do. It was also my intention to employ a very well-educated, perfect English-speaking type of person to help with the business, and I was prepared to pay well for that. While you can employ people in Thailand for not very much money, if you want someone who is good and who is perhaps from the sort of family who does that sort of thing, you should be prepared to pay a lot more. I was prepared to pay a high salary, 40,000 baht plus huge commissions based on performance, and I actually managed to recruit someone from down in Bangkok, and I gave him 2% of the business as well. He was amazing. He knew exactly what this business was meant to be, exactly what it meant, and exactly how well we could succeed if things went well. I also bought 4 pickup trucks and hired 4 more members of staff to act as delivery drivers and also to do other odd jobs that they would be doing. All in, the monthly outgoings were going to be around 200,000 baht, and that was for everything. And while the profit margins weren't going to be high, we were talking about doing this in bulk. I got a work permit, changed from a retirement visa to a marriage visa which I could work on, and after coming up with the idea, it was approximately 8 months later when we opened the business, and the guy that I got to help me started working better than I ever thought he would. We were able to buy lots of things directly from the manufacturer, and we were quickly getting lots of shops to sign up with us to sell things, and about a year later, it was about the point when I started to break even. It was exciting. As I've already said, it wasn't about the money, it was about having something to do, trying to keep myself healthy both physically and mentally, and this business was going very well. My wife was very happy that we were there and she was able to get so much support from her family, and I was happy that we made the decision. It was an awful lot of work to get that business set up. I'm not trying to say it was easy. I went back to my old ways of extremely long days, lots of ideas, dealing with the staff that we had. But at this point, I'd put my guy's salary up to 60,000, and probably with commissions he was making 100,000, which was a lot more than he probably could have made elsewhere. I treated him well and he appreciated it, and he even got himself a mortgage on a house in town and bought it. His whole family were living there, and his 2 kids were going to a private school. Things were going great. Another year went by and we were happy. We were a happy family. The business was doing well, and I'm even starting to actually take a salary out of it. I mean, I had to take a salary out of it and pay tax in order to be able to get the work permit, but that was only a marginal thing. But the fact that I had 5 Thai people working for me, they were all being paid and able to support their families, and the fact that our son was coming along very well, it wasn't exactly the retirement I was planning for even remotely, because I wasn't really retired anymore. But it was the sort of life I was happy to be living. This was about 2 years after forming the company, 2 years with my work permit, 2 years with my marriage extension. I was actually informed by the company that I used down in Bangkok to help me do everything that I should consider applying for permanent residence in Thailand, which I could get with another 1-year work permit and visa. If I had permanent residence, that would mean that I would not need to renew my visa ever again, and there were some other benefits that would go along with it as well, such as I would be able to get a mortgage to buy a condo in Thailand, which I couldn't do without it. I mean, I could buy one, but I couldn't do it on a mortgage. I could also be entered into the Blue House registration book in Thailand, which I couldn't do without it. And I would also be closer to being able to apply for citizenship if I ever wanted to do that. Now I know, I was also informed that I could have gone straight for citizenship, but in order to get citizenship, you had to score a certain amount of points. I believe it was 50 out of 100 minimum before you could apply. Or was that permanent residence? I don't really remember. My memory is not serving me very well anymore, but the reason I didn't go for citizenship was because I didn't meet all the requirements. I didn't have a degree, so I wouldn't get any points for that. I couldn't speak Thai very well apart from a few basic conversations, so permanent residence felt like it was going to be the easiest way for me to stay permanently in Thailand without renewing my visa. I should also say that 99% of foreigners never go for this. That's what I was informed, and only 100 people per nationality get it per year. It's not necessarily easy to get, and it's a long drawn-out process, and I hadn't really heard about it until the agent informed me, and it would be quite expensive to use their services, but I could afford it. So I thought, when the time was right, I would apply, and if I got it, great. If I didn't, well, never mind. We hadn't been on holiday for a very long time. My son was doing great. My wife was feeling good that we were close to her family for support. But we decided that it was about time we spent a few weeks away just completely relaxing to reset. We left the business in charge of my guy, no problems there by the way, and we went this time to Koh Samui. Another amazing resort, and we even took her cousin with us, and she was able to act as a nanny so that we could go out in the evenings together like old times and have a few wild nights. It really felt like it was the break that we both needed. We'd both been working very hard, having a good time doing it. I'm not complaining. I was having a fantastic time. My wife was just getting used to being a mother, which I still think she was struggling to come to terms with. One night, though, it really stood out as being great. We were staying not too far away from Chaweng Beach, and we had an amazing seafood meal right on the beach, beers, cocktails, the works, and we just sat there talking for hours about things, about how fantastic life was. We then went for a long walk along the beach, listening to the waves, and my wife was still the same beautiful person she always was. She'd stopped wearing her piercings, but I didn't care, and it made me actually think for a while because this was what life was before we had our son. It made me realise that I actually missed being able to do this, because this is what we were doing all the time and I loved doing it so much, and now life was so different. But we did decide that moving forwards, we should try to get away at least once every 6 months, even if it was only for 2 weeks at a time, just to reset and also give our son some great experiences. That was a wonderful family holiday, but I didn't know that it would have been our last. We returned up to the village, we got into the same patterns as we had before we went on holiday, and the months were passing by. Business was doing okay. It wasn't making fortunes, but it was paying for itself and giving me a bit of money on top for my troubles. And our son was approaching the age where he was about to start nursery, or whatever it is they call it in Thailand, before school. I was quietly missing my old retired life, because if I thought about how old I was at the time, and then added another 15 years to that, that would have been when my son was 18, and even then there was university after that and other things that would go along with it. So I never really had any dreams of an actual retirement again because I thought I would probably be too old by that time, that he was doing his own things. But again, things would never get there, unfortunately. The following year passed without incident, and we're approaching the time when I can actually apply for this permanent residence thing, which I was extremely excited about, given that I didn't even know it existed until I was informed of it. My full 3 years of my marriage visa and work permit, as well as my tax payments and everything, had come up in January of that year. And because the way it works, you had to apply at a certain time of the year for residence, and that was usually around December. I am starting to get a bit tired in terms of the business though. It's taking up a lot of time and effort, and while it's making bits of money, it's not like it was needed. But I'm continuing, and I'm actually starting to think perhaps I will scale it down a bit after I put in the residence application. It was around this time that I actually had to go back to my own country for a funeral. One of my closest friends had sadly passed away, so I took 2 weeks to go there and pay my respects. And that also made me think that it was about time I did scale back the business, because I was working just like I used to do before. I was working all the time. The problem was, though, what would I do without the business? I'd be bored again, and I started talking to my wife about the possibility of maybe moving back to Bangkok, getting a bigger place there, and she was warming to the idea because our son was getting older, he was getting easier to handle, and if needs be, we could take her cousin with us, who was a few years younger than she was, and she would be able to act as a nanny, and we'd have some time to do things we wanted and someone there to help. Nothing was decided yet, nothing was set in stone. These were just things that we were talking about and thinking about. It wasn't close to that point yet, and we probably still had a few years to go before that would be the case, because after applying for residence, could be a few years before hopefully being approved for it. One thing though that I did around March of that year was go down to Bangkok, speak to my agent who had done a fantastic job with absolutely everything I'd used them for, and they gave me a long list of documentation that I needed to get together for residence. They were going to charge me around 500,000 baht to help me with the application, which sounded like a lot of money, seeing as when they helped me with the visa it was only a small fraction of that. But it did seem like it was an awful lot of work, and the amount of paperwork we would need would be substantial. And it always made sense to me to use the help of a professional to get the job done properly, instead of doing it wrong once, and then using someone to help you afterwards, when you should have just used someone to start with. The business was still going well though, although I had taken a step back and my guy was doing a lot more work and he was making more money because of it. And I was starting to think that perhaps I should just hand over the business to him because I didn't need it. It was just something for me to do. And he was doing a great job, and it was because of this that I was able to apply for permanent residence in the first place. But I hadn't got that far yet. Then began the task of preparing all the documentation for permanent residence. Some of the basic ones were basic. Copies of our marriage certificate, copies of my wife's house registration, copies of our son's birth certificate. Everything that we could possibly need in terms of copies of documents was quite easy to do. Then I needed a criminal record check from my own country, which was a bit more tedious, and I started out by contacting the embassy, asking them how to get it, and there was a process you had to go, but it took about a month to get that. That was a waiting game. Of course, I needed all my tax returns as well. I was paying myself a good salary, and that in turn meant I was paying tax every month. So I had all that, my work permit, I had that for over 3 years, and that needed multiple copies of each page. My passport, of course, needed multiple copies of each page as well. The marriage visa and everything needed copying. And I think we got all that ready by May of that year. Still around 5 to 6 months to go before the application window was open, so we had plenty of time to get everything else that we would need. I went back down to Bangkok with everything we had, and they began the task of putting everything into neat piles, because we had lots of copies of everything, and they would need multiple sets of everything for some reason. Thailand and the bureaucracy was just one of those things you put up with, and you just did it without complaining or thinking anything of it, because if you started to get upset about it, that was when you would question whether you actually wanted to continue or not. But I was just taking it as it came. If I got it, good. If I didn't, never mind. Next, I had to do a health check at a Thai government hospital. That didn't actually cause many issues. I was in and out in a few hours, and that was one more document out of the way. And while my Thai language was getting a bit better, it wasn't great, but I was told that as long as I could hold basic conversations, it should be okay. It wasn't as stringent as many people made it out to be, although I was just going to take it as it came and play it all by ear. I was going into it thinking I wasn't going to get it, so if I got it, it would be good. I think that's the best way to do anything in Thailand. If you're doing something, think that it's not going to work. Expect it to not work. And if it doesn't work, never mind. If it does, very good. That always worked very well for me in Thailand, and I would recommend anybody else to do the same thing if you want to do something in the country. We were approaching August, and I was with my agent again, and they were looking through all the paperwork and everything seemed to be in order. There were still a few things outstanding, and one thing that was outstanding was that I needed to do a DNA test at a Thai hospital to prove that my son was mine. It was just one of the requirements, and I thought that was a very strange thing to ask for, but it had to be done, so we went to get it done. We went to this hospital together, me and my son and my wife also went along, and we were told that the results would be available in approximately 1 or 2 weeks' time. That didn't seem like it was going to be too bad, given that we had ample time to get everything ready before we needed to put the application in, so we returned back to the village and just continued as normal. About 10 days later, I got a call saying that there had been some kind of error and we needed to go back and do the whole thing again. No big deal because this was Thailand and things like that can happen. So we went all the way back to Bangkok to this government hospital and repeated the process again. There was no hint that there was anything wrong here. And then from there, we went back to the village again, and I received a call saying that I needed to be there. Very well. So I drove back to Bangkok, and the following day I went into the hospital, and the doctor was sat there, and he had this sickening look on his face. The DNA test shows that your son is not your son. In that moment, I had no idea what to say. I actually shouted at him, "How dare you say that? Of course he's my son. I've been bringing him up, he's my son and I had him with my wife." But he showed me the results. "No, he's not. That's why we did it twice. He's not your son." That was probably the day that my world ended. The doctor said he would recommend that I get in touch with other companies that could actually check and do that as well to make sure that we're 100% certain, because he was only 99.9% certain. But that's how he put it to me. He wasn't being smart about it, he was just being as delicate as he could. And I can remember walking out of the hospital thinking about how could this be the case. I went to a hotel and my wife was calling me and I didn't want to answer. And I remembered what he said, so I looked online for other ways of doing these tests and I just thought, is there any point? I mean, it's already certain. But I told my wife that we still had to wait for the results. I didn't want to get angry yet, just in case this 0.1% chance was actually real. I told her that she needed to come down to Bangkok because I found somewhere else to do this, and told her that we were having problems at the hospital or whatever. I made up something because I wasn't about to throw away my whole life unless I was 100% certain. So she arrived with our son and we went there, and I was obviously looking very upset and shocked about the whole thing, and I just had to tell my wife that I was really unwell with a fever. I can't remember what I said exactly, but I told her she needed to go back up to the village for whatever reason. Again, I can't remember. And I waited in Bangkok for the results. While I was already pretty sure what was going to come back, and bear in mind my wife didn't appear to be concerned at all, I was a nervous wreck. I was at the bars every day. I was getting absolutely annihilated, even more so than I did before, because I just couldn't come to terms with the fact that this could be real. After everything I'd done, not necessarily just in terms of the money I spent, adding everything up, there was $100,000 on the house. Everything that we put in the house and the swimming pool was another $40,000. The shop house in town, that was $110,000. When I got married to my wife, $30,000. Probably another $80,000 spent on her as well. Then all this money, everything I'd given to my wife over the years, and other things, $50,000. $30,000 for her family. The car which I bought for my wife, $100,000. And at least another $150,000 on top of that. I can't even remember what it was about. But all that money that I'd invested into this relationship, and if this was actually true, it would have all been for nothing. That week passed by and my wife's calling me and I'm not answering the phone anymore. I've just told her I'm not well and I'll speak to her when I feel better. And when I went to get the results, it was exactly as expected. He wasn't my son. It now had been 3 tests and it was undeniable. He wasn't my son. And I'm thinking, whose son could he be? Then I remembered, back to the time we went to Krabi with my wife's friend and her boyfriend, and the time after when we went to Phuket. Everything seemed to add up to the fact. Everything. More likely than not, it was his. Funnily enough, he was still with his girlfriend. They were actually married now, and they had just had their own child, and they were living in Thailand, in Bangkok. And while I wasn't friends with him, I had probably spoken to him once over the last year. So I called him up, told him I was in Bangkok, and asked if he fancied meeting for a beer. He said he would, so we arranged to meet at the Australian place on Soy 11, which I believe isn't there anymore, although that's only a minor detail given the fact that I'm about to confront the guy who could have had a child with my wife that I'd been bringing up as my own and spending a bloody fortune on. Luckily, he arranged to meet me that evening, so I didn't have to go through another sleepless, drunken night, and I made my way there for 7 p.m, and he was sat at the table, smile on his face, and he stood up, we shook hands and I sat down, and I think he could tell that there was something wrong. Before he had a chance to say anything, I looked at him and said, I need to ask you a question, and I need you to tell me the truth straight away, because something has happened to me that nothing could be worse than. So if you try to do anything other than tell me the truth, I don't care what happens to me. When we went away with you that time, did you do anything with my wife, yes or no? He had a really shocked look on his face, like he was concerned. He said, What do you mean? What do you mean, did I do anything with your wife? Did you do anything with my wife, yes or no? And I think he knew I was extremely serious, and he just said he did. 5 times, he said. And that was all I needed to know. Well then, I said, it appears that I've been raising your son for the past number of years, and I've also invested heavily into many things together with my wife, and it appears that I shouldn't have been doing that. This huge look of fear on his face was like a look I'd never seen before, and before he had a chance to say anything, I stood up and walked out. I was pretty sure that it was him, because all the timing was right, unless she'd done something with someone else as well, although I don't know how. But that would have been a lot more difficult anyway. Everything added up, and I'd been raising this guy's son, and now I'm thinking, what am I going to do with my life? It's a very difficult situation to find yourself in. I suppose many guys have spoken about it to other guys in the past. What would you do if you found this out? Some of them would say, well, I would still support the child because we're still like father and son, and I've been bringing him up anyway, and it wasn't his fault. Others would say, I would immediately cease any contact out of embarrassment, and it's not my fault that my wife was such a disgusting human being. She must have had some inkling that something was wrong. She must have thought that doing multiple DNA tests was a problem. She must have been holding out some fear deep down that something was wrong, but she acted like nothing was wrong. Now I've got the difficult decision to make about what I should do. If I add up everything at this point, I actually checked properly to make sure I understood how much money I'd spent on everything I did together with her. It added up to around $700,000. That wasn't including my own condo, but $700,000 on everything, all of it a lie. And while I hesitate to use the word lucky, in that I had all my investments remaining and still had a very good income coming in, at this point it had risen because my investments had done well and I was on about $9,000 a month, but it wasn't about that. It was about something far worse than that. I would have given another $700,000 for the results to have come back a different way, but I couldn't. He wasn't my son, and that was the end of it. And after I left that place with him, I went back to the hotel and thought, I'm going to go crazy on Soy Cowboy tonight, and I'm going to call my wife on video and tell her what I found out. I never called her like that. I was just being dramatic at the time, but I did go out and I can't remember the night because I got so drunk. And the following morning, my wife calls me asking if I'm feeling better, and I said no, I'm feeling far worse. I had an interesting meeting with your son's father yesterday. I think you need to come to Bangkok, and you'd better leave your son there. I hung up before she had a chance to say anything else, and I didn't answer when she called back. I wondered if she'd put 2 and 2 together, or was she still oblivious to what was going on. But she arrived in Bangkok at around 4 a.m, so I take it that she was a bit concerned. I was too drunk to say anything, but she kept saying, what's wrong, and I pointed to the results which I'd left out on the dresser. I remember her saying not possible, but then I fell asleep and woke up in the morning and she was there, saying that this wasn't possible, he was my son, and I asked her how she could explain the fact that we'd had 3 DNA tests done and they all came back saying he wasn't a match, and that I went to speak to the German guy who went away with us, and he said that he did things with you. How are you meant to explain that away? She couldn't. And she said she had no idea. She always thought he was mine and she was sorry. And then she said, can we just pretend that this never happened? I was not going to be one of those guys who would accept something like that, and I just said no. I never want to see him again. It's not his fault, and I feel bad for him, but this is the biggest form of humiliation that any guy can ever face. And you've pushed this onto me, and I'm not happy about it. I'm not accepting this. It's over. Our relationship is over. And everything, up in the village, the business, everything, I want nothing more to do with it. We're through. She started crying hysterically, saying she was so sorry. Could I forgive her? And then the worst thing was she started throwing herself all over me, trying to get me to change my mind. What kind of crazy individual can think something as serious as that can be forgotten based on her doing something like that? I mean, if it was something like she'd accidentally lost her phone and wanted a new one, oh, okay, that's the sort of thing I would expect. But I wouldn't expect something like that given the fact that I'd just found out that the son I was raising, all the money I'd spent on him, and the fact that I'd completely changed my dream retirement for her son. I wasn't living the way I expected to live in retirement. It was a dreadful situation and it destroyed me. She didn't want to leave the hotel, and I kept telling her, you've got no choice. There's nothing you can do to make me change my mind. This is a thing I'm not prepared to accept. The fact that you cheated on me as well is bad enough. But the fact that you had me raising someone else's son, no. That's not something I'm prepared to accept. And eventually, she did leave. Rather ironically, I received a phone call from the agent about half an hour after she left asking how things were going in terms of getting the DNA test results. But when I told them the truth, they were rather stunned, as you'd expect. But I said thank you so much for telling me about this permanent residence thing, because without it, I would never have known the truth. I felt humiliated, I felt degraded, and I just felt disgusting. Disgusting is the only word to describe it, and then I had to start thinking about what I wanted to do with the rest of my retirement. My wife was continuously trying to call me multiple times, but I didn't answer. I didn't have anything important at our house in Isan. I had the business, and I called my guy and told him what had happened, and I told him I'd transfer my shares to him. Anything to make sure she didn't get them. And because he already owned 2%, he was now the majority owner, so that was a big positive, and I don't know what happened from there. That was the last I spoke with him. I decided to sell my condo in Bangkok. I wanted to sell it as quickly as I possibly could, so I put it on for 75% of its value, and I had an offer within a week, and that was sold, and I got rid of it. I thought about pursuing my wife through the courts for half of everything, but the problem was the house in the village, that couldn't be sold easily. I mean, it was very difficult to sell. The car we had for a number of years now, and it wasn't like these Japanese cars that hold their value in Thailand. The German cars depreciate a lot, so probably only had $1 million in that and a bit. And then the shop house. It just all seemed like it would be too much work, and I had my income coming in, and I decided that I was just going to leave Thailand. I did contact my agent one more time, saying I wanted to get divorced from her, and I asked them to arrange with her to come down and do it properly, otherwise I would take her to court and take half of everything. So that was the last I saw of her, when we went to the district office to get divorced, and she was crying all the time, saying she was so sorry. Could I forgive her? Absolutely not. From there, I was single again. Because of that, I had no marriage visa anymore, and I had 7 days to leave the country. I could have switched to a retirement visa, but I had no desire to live in Thailand anymore. The problem was then, where do I move? I don't want to go back to my own country, even though I've got enough money to do that. I don't really want to go anywhere in Europe. I decided, because it wasn't of interest to me, and I've spent months in my life in South America, and I didn't really want to live there. So it seemed like the best options were countries in the region. I decided to fly first to Cambodia to have a look there, but I didn't really like it. Next to Vietnam, which was okay, and the Philippines, which again was okay, but I preferred Thailand so much, but I didn't want to be there. I eventually decided that I would live in Vietnam, and that's where I am today, and I have a good life. I'm not short of money, I don't want for anything, but I still think back to that time when that happened, because it was so awful to witness. I have no idea what she's doing now, no idea what her son is doing now, and to be honest, I couldn't give a flying F.